The Galactic Conclave had a tradition when dealing with new species. If diplomacy failed, you showed them the Vorkai. Nobody ever needed to show them the Vorkai twice. The creature was the apex predator of Dreth Prime, a world of ammonia storms and crushing gravity that had produced, over millions of years of brutal evolution, something that defied the imagination. 12 meters of armored muscle, 6 compound eyes that could track movement across a kilometer, and a jaw structure capable of crushing tungsten carbide like chalk. The Conclave had domesticated exactly 3 of them over 2 centuries. Not tamed, domesticated, in the loosest, most terrifying sense of the word. They kept them in reinforced holds lined with neurosuppression fields, fed them half-ton protein blocks, and prayed to whatever gods their species recognized that the fields never flickered. They used the Vorkai the way other civilizations used ultimatums. You didn't need words when you had something like that standing behind you. Ambassador Kale of the Dreth delegation was not a cruel being by nature. He had broad, slate-gray shoulders, for arms folded with careful, diplomatic patience, and eyes the color of deep ocean water on a stormy day. He had negotiated 17 treaties. He had ended 2 wars with nothing but paperwork and patience. But the humans had been difficult. Not aggressive, not stupid, just difficult. They asked too many questions. They laughed at inappropriate moments. Their lead negotiator, a woman named Serafina Voss, had spent the last 2 sessions of trade talks drumming her fingers on the table and looking at the Conclave's terms with the kind of expression one reserved for mildly disappointing takeout food. They had rejected the Conclave's resource extraction proposal twice, and their counteroffer had been so audaciously favorable to their own species that 3 of the senior Conclave members had needed medical sedation for stress-related conditions. Kale had been patient. He had been reasonable, but enough was enough. "We will be introducing a new element to tomorrow's session," he told his aide, Provisional Envoy Thress, that evening. "Prepare the 3rd hold. Wake the Vorkai." Thress blinked all 4 of his secondary eyes at once, a Dreth expression of profound discomfort. "Ambassador, the humans haven't actually threatened us. Protocol requires that negotiations conclude within the standard cycle," Kale said firmly. "The Vorkai will encourage a conclusion." The next morning, Serafina Voss arrived to the negotiation chamber the same way she always did, 5 minutes early, carrying a ceramic mug of something black and steam-producing that the Conclave's cultural analysts had identified as a ritualistic stimulant beverage, wearing an expression of polite, unshakable calm. She was tall for a human, dark-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested she had once stood her ground in places considerably more dangerous than a conference room. She set her mug down, opened her folder, and looked across the table at the Dreth delegation. Then the rear wall of the chamber slid open. The Vorkai entered. To the Conclave's immense satisfaction, every human in the room went completely silent. The creature moved with a horrible, liquid grace for something so massive, its armored plates catching the chamber light like oil on water. The neurosuppression collar around its neck hummed at a frequency that made the walls vibrate. Its 6 eyes swept the room and settled, with ancient predatory certainty, on the cluster of small, soft, unarmored humans. Kale let the silence breathe. He had seen this moment across a dozen species. The frozen stillness. The primitive terror reactivating ancient wiring. The sudden, urgent willingness to reconsider one's negotiating position. He spread his upper hands in a magnanimous gesture. "Perhaps," he said, "we might find the Conclave's original terms more agreeable today." Serafina looked at the Vorkai for a long moment. Then she looked at Kale. Then she looked back at the Vorkai. She picked up her mug, took a slow sip of her stimulant beverage, and set it down with a soft ceramic clink that was somehow, in that vast and silent chamber, the loudest sound in the room. "What does it eat?" she asked. Kale blinked. "I what?" "The animal." She gestured at the Vorkai with her pen. "What's its diet? Is that armor natural, or is there a softer underbelly situation? And is it warm-blooded?" "I'm asking because the protein density on something that size would be extraordinary, and I want to understand if we're looking at a red meat equivalent or something more like shellfish." The entire Dreth delegation stared at her. Behind Serafina, her aide, a young man who had clearly been terrified 30 seconds ago, had already pulled out a tablet and was typing furiously. "Cross-referencing now," he murmured. The ammonia-based biology might cause issues, but if they breathe oxygen in the wild phase. That's what I'm thinking, Serafina said, nodding. The oxidation profile would. What is happening? Dreth whispered to Kale in their native tongue. Kale did not have an answer. Serafina set her pen down and addressed Kale with the tone of someone who was genuinely, earnestly curious rather than performing anything at all. Look, I don't want to derail the session, but we have a xenobiology team on our ship, and I want to flag this as a potential agricultural interest. Earth has a history of, she paused, searching for the diplomatic phrasing, aggressively integrating local fauna into our food systems. If the Vorkai has viable protein chains compatible with human digestion, that changes some of the resource calculus we've been going back and forth on. We might not need the asteroid mining rights at all if there's a sustainable ranching angle here. Ranching, Kale repeated. The word translated through his earpiece and landed in his brain with a meaning he understood intellectually but could not process emotionally. Or fishing, depending on the biology. She tilted her head. Does it swim? The Vorkai, as if responding to the bizarre shift in atmospheric tension in the room, let out a low subsonic rumble that shook the floor. Every Dreth delegate gripped their seat. It was a warning sound. A sound that said, in the evolutionary language of Dreth Prime, I have crushed mountains. I have ended bloodlines. I am the last word in every argument. Serafina turned to look at it directly. She did not grip her seat. Okay, it's definitely warm-blooded, she said. You can hear it in the resonance. That's a metabolic sound. She looked genuinely delighted. Can I get closer? No, said 4 members of the Dreth delegation simultaneously. The negotiations concluded 3 hours later. They concluded, to the absolute bewilderment of the galactic conclave, almost entirely in humanity's favor, not because the humans had been cowed, and not because they had made threats of their own, but because Kale had spent those 3 hours in a state of such profound existential recalibration that he had simply agreed to things. The Conclave's xenopsychology team would later describe it in their report as negotiator's vertigo, the specific cognitive paralysis that occurs when a situation behaves in a manner so fundamentally contrary to all modeled outcomes that the brain defaults to compliance as a coping mechanism. Serafina, for her part, had walked away with favorable trade terms, a joint research agreement, and, after considerable back and forth, an unprecedented xenobiological study permit for Vorkai biology, with a strict non-lethal research clause that she had agreed to with a smile that her aide privately felt was doing a lot of work. On the shuttle back to the human fleet, her aide, Marcus, looked up from his notes. Did you actually want to eat it? He asked. Or was that a tactic? Serafina drank the last cold sip of her coffee and considered the question with genuine seriousness. Both, she said finally. It's not mutually exclusive. Marcus looked out the viewport at the stars for a moment. The Dreth are going to tell everyone about this. Good. She closed her folder. Let them. And they did. The report circulated through the galactic conclave within a standard cycle. The summary was brief, clinical, and deeply unsettling to every species that read it. It described how humanity's lead negotiator had responded to the introduction of the conclave's apex biological deterrent not with fear, not with aggression, but with what the report carefully termed applied culinary curiosity. 3 species quietly withdrew pending requests to use aggressive negotiation tactics against human delegations. 2 others requested cultural exchange programs, citing a desire to better understand human psychology before any further diplomatic contact. And in a private chamber on Dreth Prime, Ambassador Kale sat across from Provisional Envoy Dreth and said nothing for a very long time. We should have just taken their counteroffer, Dreth said eventually. Kale unfolded all 4 of his arms, stared at the ceiling, and made a sound that, in Dreth, translated roughly as the specific emotional state of having been correct about something you genuinely wished you had been wrong about. Yes, he said, we should have. Somewhere in the research annex of the human vessel, Marcus had filed 3 separate reports, one diplomatic, one xenobiological, and one that he had quietly labeled potential menu item, pending ethics review. Serafina had countersigned all 3 without changing a word.